Well, hi everybody. My name's Denise McKenzie. The accent is obviously not from the UK, but I have lived here for 10 years.
Haven't lost the accent though.
No, I know. Originally started in Australia. So I'm managing partner of a thing called the Place Trust. This is an entity that's less than 2 years old at this point and is a data trust set up here in the UK. Place as a group has also an incorporation in the US that's a 501c3, if you know what that is, or a charity based in the US too. What Place Group does as a whole is really predominantly works with governments around the world to help them map in high resolution data their largest growing urban populations. And our focus predominantly is those in the developing world. So thinking Africa here, thinking small island nations in the Caribbean, thinking the Pacific in terms of our focus. But really we could work with any government in the world. The interesting thing about us is that we're a model that's sort of a new style of data institution. So this is about trying to fix a lot of those data access problems that we have. I always love watching the products that are available in the UK because I was literally just talking to the Deputy Surveyor General of Nigeria who could only dream of having that type of data to deal with his 200 million population that he's got going in Nigeria at the moment. So what we are as an organisation, I guess, is we build a partnership with the government. It's a non-financial relationship with those governments, and we help fund the acquisition of high-resolution aerial photography and street view imagery for these urban spaces. We try and capture on an annual basis with them as well. What happens, though, is that we leave the intellectual property for that imagery all entirely in country, so it's sovereignly owned by that nation. And they gift a copy into the data trust that we have here in the UK. And then around that data trust, we have a membership community of organisations that can join and then also get access to those copies of data too. So in terms of uses and sustainable development or anything, the data that sits inside Place Trust is now being used for urban planning, it's being used for disaster management, it's being used for health planning, it's being used for transport and logistics. In some of our fastest growing urban populations, particularly in the global south. And I'll stop there. So if anyone wants to know more, let me know.
No, it's an amazing project, and it's something that I think we do forget the value of the data we have here is not available everywhere by a very long way.
Absolutely, Liz. Yes, thank you. So I'm Liz Scott, and I'm from the Satellite Applications Catapult. So if you're not familiar with the concept of catapults, there's 9 of them, although I think there's going to be a 10th one very soon, set up about 10 years ago. So we're partly funded by government. We do a lot of research alongside academic institutions. And we work to join up academia, industry and government and basically try and get people talking with each other. We do a lot of advice and consultancy sort of work as well. And we work with a lot of startups and try and help people bring ideas. We work with, we do sort of things like business sprints and help small organisations apply for funding and that sort of thing. So that's the actual Catapult, and I'm in the Geospatial team and as a solutions architect.
Thank you, Liz. Michelle.
Oh, sorry. Super. Hi. So I'm Michelle Oldfield. So slightly drier. I work in civil engineering and construction. So I work for a French company as well. But we are based here in the UK at the moment. And my role is as a GIS lead on one of our big projects here. And it's very much my job, my responsibility to make sure that geospatial data is democratised for the industry, so within our project. So it's very much a challenge around behaviours, adoption, what people are used to, and how we can basically just normalise geospatial data to make better sustainable decisions through in the construction industry. So, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So I thought it was interesting that you've all got such different focus areas. That was kind of intentional because I think we talk about sustainable development as a kind of buzzword, but actually it can mean so many different things. So we'd start off by just asking each of you, how does that theme of sustainable development show up in your world? Maybe we'll start with you, Michelle, this time.
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, it crosses many different many different things. So we have quite strong leadership within our organisation around sustainability, certainly around environmental and social as well. And so, our organisation has signed up to things like the Sustainability Supply Chain School, and we focus on sort of making small changes but on a larger scale. So we look at also how we interface with our local, not just our natural environment, but also our people. So how are we use geospatial data to understand where are the people that we're working with, where are they employed, and then how far are they travelling, and all sorts of quite niche things. But it's really a case of just making sure that, through, as I said, leadership and commitment, really, that we're constantly educating people as well. It's certainly an industry where sustainability is not always at the forefront of people's mind. So it's very much we need to build, we've got a programme to stick to. So it's normalising again, let's use technology where we can to do things better and to, get more data and more insight and to use that to inform better decisions. So I'll probably hand over. Okay.
Liz, what about from the Catapult point of view? When you talk about sustainable development, how does satellite data, help inform that in your world?
Wow. In the Catapult, the satellite applications Catapult, we're actually divided, our work is divided into 4 missions called Sustainable Earth, Connected Earth, Autonomous Earth and Beyond Earth. And the Beyond Earth people are the space rocket guys building weird things in space. But most of the work that we're looking at regarding Earth observation data is in the Sustainable Earth mission. The thing that satellite data is very good for is for the long-term monitoring, and has been for, since the first Earth observation satellites went up a few decades ago. So we've always been concerned with seeing how we can advise on the use of Earth observation data for the long-term monitoring, but also with new satellite technology, we're now able to monitor greenhouse gases from space as well. So that's quite a new thing. Thermal data as well, for looking at thermal losses from buildings and that type of thing, and tracking a lot of emissions from factories and power plants all around the world. And of course, the big one as well, which AI gets involved with a lot, is change management, change detection. So looking to see where you might have things like deforestation. And there are a huge amount of companies desperately working on trying to do automated methods for detecting where there's deforestation going on.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Thank you. Denise?
I think probably for us, sustainable development fits in absolutely every aspect of what we do. And I'll take this a little bit away from environmental, because you guys have covered that and we do plenty of the environmental side. But when you think about those 17 sustainable development goals, it's much bigger than just the environment. You're talking about people's lives, you're talking about infrastructure, you're talking about, basically how people are living as well. So for us, the type of data that we're collecting, if you take, for example, the data we've just collected in Zumba in Malawi, very much about trying to understand the population that is there. And when you think about a population in that part of the world, you're not thinking about people in the formal housing that we've just been talking about in markets here. You're talking about people that have built shanty towns and informal settlements, and the impact of what that growth does within an urban space, particularly an urban space that hasn't been nicely laid out and hasn't been planned in what they're doing. And so for us, you're seeing them trying to understand, that informal settlement encroachment on roads and how that impacts transport and logistics ability to get from, say, the capital in Malawi, in the long way down to Zumba. You're looking at things like the landslides that happened close by to Zumba in Ballantine, where they had huge life lost, and realisation that actually people are informally settling in places that are basically completely dangerous for them to be doing so. Often happens on floodplains, often happens in places where you've got unstable earth, etc., that are there. But of course, they have no other option than to be living where they are. So the type of data that we're helping them collect and get access to enables them to at least start to enumerate, how many sort of dwellings they're looking at in this, and give an estimate of population. And then start to think, well, if with our meagre resources that we've got, what can we do that might guide people to perhaps settle in a safer place, might guide people to better materials, or might, enable them to do better urban planning, to do a lot of that. And so For us, this is about trying to replicate a lot of that in different parts of the world. So, and we're working with groups like Cities Alliance, etc., to, I guess, empower local councils to get access to the data, as well as the national government there. Using the environmental side too, and going back to all of the very funky AI and machine learning type activities, I've seen some absolutely brilliant examples working with people like Clark University in the United States and Oak Ridge National Labs. One of the coolest I saw was them running a piece of machine learning to feature detect every single air conditioning unit on the top of the building. And then because of the resolution of the data we're able to give, they're actually able to do an estimate of the size of that particular air conditioning unit. They then started looking at the energy grid and vulnerabilities within the energy grid in the city. And then started looking at the meteorological data as well, and started being able to go, wow, you know, if you had a spike of 5 degrees in this area of the urban space, and you've got this many of these types of air conditioning units, you've probably got a electricity problem in grid overload.
See, that's really interesting, because we talk about these kind of amazing initiatives happening within in the markets you operate in, but I don't think we do that sophisticated stuff here in the UK. I mean, like, it's interesting how these development initiatives can sometimes almost piggyback the kind of stuff, because there is no existing kind of framework for data usage. So actually you're starting with a bit of a blank slate in terms of how you can derive questions. I've got a question here where I was going to talk about, obviously the data plays a huge role in how you all do your work, in terms of the things, the companies you advise, in terms of the projects you run, in terms of the governments you work with. What are the key challenges, right? Because again, it's a really big question, but if you could just pick one thing initially of when you're working with data, its broader sense, what's the first thing that you think about as being a challenge of working with data in your world for sustainability outcomes?
I think I'm going to say it's actually skills. Is one of the skills and capacity element for a lot of organisations is still the hardest bit, because that technology we're talking about earlier today that I was listening to Chris discuss on the AI, there's so few people that can really actually harness that and use it well. But, you know, throughout the world, the range of capacity is just still, like, there are just still places that don't even have a basic cadastral system. You know, so the ability to even just put a simple digital base map in
skills
is the skills bit, is the bit that I would say is probably still, apart from data access as well, which is always a problem.
Both of those things, actually. Where in my work in particular, one of the problems that everyone who works in Earth observation has to deal with when you're advising people is what we sometimes call the Hollywood effect, and that's trying to manage the the disparity between what people say, what people see in the movies, and the reality of what satellites can actually do, which is quite dull in comparison. But not sort of zooming down and being able to, you know, suddenly like make up data. So there is that. But one of the big things that we also have to deal with is just the sheer amount of data and the complexity of dealing with it. So what we're all familiar with seeing when you look at Google Maps or something has gone through so many layers of processing to get to that point. So you've taken off all the sort of atmospheric effects, and then there's never any cloud anywhere. But if you ever try and buy satellite imagery, you know, especially for this country, most of it's going to be covered in cloud. You just get lucky little pockets here and there. So you've got those sorts of things, and then, like Denise said about just finding data, it's actually really difficult to be able to, even for people working in the geospatial industry, just to be able to know where to go if they wanted to make a start using data from satellite.
So discoverability, and
Yes,
by the Hollywood
absolutely,
effect is, so I think expectation versus reality is always a real challenge, and I think consumer expectations around some of this stuff are, they're set by the stuff they've seen in film, but it's insane.
The other thing actually is that Google, a lot of what you see on Google Maps is actually aerial photography. So it will say satellite, and it's aerial. So people think that that's what you can get from satellite.
Michelle?
Yeah, I was going to say, just to add to that as well, I think one of the challenges that I certainly find is around sort of siloed information, the interoperability of it, and then totally touching on finding someone to bring that together to present something that's accessible. So pulling all these things together, really. But that's the main challenge I think that we have. We have very rich data. We have a lot of drone information. We have a lot of telematics, a lot of information, but it often it's procured or made available in its own little way with maybe a good API. A lot of people are like, what's an API? So it's finding that ability to bring all that data together as well to make it meaningful, because we can pull that data together and we can report, oh, this particular generator runs on diesel now. This is very small, but we're going to change that to electricity and have this impact. We can report on that, but actually gathering insight on scale is quite a challenge. And I think that for me is the biggest thing about how we can, again, just democratize that information to bring meaning to it, to people that can actually influence change, I think is probably the biggest challenge.
Fantastic.
Or one of.
Really interesting. So we've probably got time for one more question, I think. If you could make, this is my magic wand question. If you could wave a magic wand and there was no technical or financial barriers and you could wish up a data set or a kind of data that's not currently available, what would it be that would change your mission?
Well, I mean, I have to turn around and say the high-res aerial photography. I think that's, because of that development in the AI and machine learning space, that type of data now has just become so much more rich in your ability to do things. So I would say if you're going to pick...
Because you can interrogate it at scale.
We can interrogate it at scale. You can just derive so much insight and intelligence out of a really good quality piece of aerial photography now in a way that 5 years ago you just couldn't extract that type of data.
So you want your own fleet of aeroplanes?
I do. I just want a fleet of airplanes because they get to
magic wand, right?
that's it. They get under the clouds, and sort of. So it's much better. That would be my pick.
Okay, so 1,000 airplanes. What do you want?
I'd go for really high spec satellites. So you can get satellites. Some of them just take pictures, like a mobile phone in space sort of thing, and some of them can take pictures in the infrared spectrum as well, and they'll layer it up in such a way that you can, if you're like super clever, you can actually examine all of those different layers and be able to see how vegetation is reflecting that infrared. And by doing that, you can see little signatures for different sorts of species of plants. And so there's actually, and health, exactly, yes. So there's actually, at the minute, it's really academic. So there's also, if you Google anything to do with, like, can I tell species of trees from space? Sort of, yes, but not very well, and definitely not at scale. But that's all going to change in the next few years. But we need lots of AI and people who are skilled to be able to deal with it, to be able to do any of that at scale.
That sounds pretty cool.
It will be, yeah.
The satellite plant identification system.
Yes.
It's nice.
Excellent.
It's also fun. What do you want, Michelle?
So I think for me, to complement these two things, I'm probably more focused on the people side of things. So where are the people? And so for me, it would be, again, if no barriers, a bit Big Brother, but really opening up and sort of mobile information. So tracking people or just trying to identify patterns of movements and how that interfaces with the natural environment and also the built environment. So magic wand, get rid of, but that would be my...
That's all mobile data. But you'll keep it safe and you'll keep us safe, right?
Yeah, so this is the thing. If we're getting rid of everything, then I might as well go for the one thing that we shouldn't really probably have.
It's interesting because it is one of those things that, we've been we've worked around this geospatial data ethics stuff, and it is really fascinating. The power of that data is extraordinary, and I think we are still trying to find ways of making it available for the insights without losing those privacy things. But in your magic world, you can have it.
Exactly.
Only you can see it. So
and only I would use it for good. Data for good.
Of course,
that would be but again, that utopia,
awesome.
That's what I would have.
Look, I think it's been great talking to you. We're probably running out of time, but thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. It's been fascinating. Denise?
Cool. Thank you very much.
Michelle, thank you.
Thank you.